Imagine you're on a road trip, right? And you pull your electric car up to a charging station.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, normally you'd get out, maybe fiddle with a credit card reader or pull up some clunky app on your phone.
Oh, yeah, or find out the card reader is broken.
Exactly. But in this scenario, you don't do any of that. You just plug the cable in.
Just the physical connection.
Right, just the physical connection. And the moment you do that, your car's internal software starts this like silent, high-speed negotiation with the charging station software.
They're essentially talking to each other.
Yeah, and they agree on a price for electricity per second. So as the power flows into your battery, your car is streaming these microscopic fractions of a digital dollar directly to the station.
Wow, so it's paying byte by byte.
Exactly. Settling the payment instantly. No banks, no payment processors, no credit card networks involved at all. Just machines trading value in real time.
I mean, that sounds like science fiction, or at least some, very distant utopian view of how infrastructure could work.
It really does.
But the underlying mechanics to make that exact scenario happen are literally being built right now. And the reason that specific example is so vital to understand is that it completely reorients how we're supposed to look at this massive tech shift happening around us.
And chaotic is putting it mildly, honestly. I mean, if you look at the headlines or just scroll through social media, the wall of noise surrounding this stuff is deafening.
No, absolutely deafening.
We're talking, of course, about the world of crypto, digital assets, and decentralized networks. And the way it's presented to you, the listener, is almost always pushed to these extreme edges.
It's very polarized.
Right. It's either this glorious revolution that's going to dismantle all global banking, or it's a terrifying systemic risk that'll collapse the economy, or just a frantic casino where you're already too late to make any real money.
And when a topic is dominated by that kind of polarized noise, a very predictable reaction happens.
People just tune out.
Exactly. People simply tune it out. If you're a pragmatist and you constantly hear that something is either a total miracle or a massive scam, your instinct is just to step back.
You just assume it has no bearing on your actual day-to-day life.
Right. You assume it's just this contained playground for, day traders and software engineers.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because we are taking a scalpel to that noise today.
I love that. A scalpel.
We really have to. We're stripping away the hype, the fear-mongering, and those exaggerated promises. Our goal is to build a calm, practical understanding of what this architectural shift actually means for your future.
And we have to set a baseline here.
Yes, the most important baseline. We're going to do all of this today, assuming you never, ever buy a single digital coin.
That is the foundation we have to operate from, because this conversation is not about market participation.
Not at all.
It's about infrastructural reality, because this technology is fundamentally a much deeper story about how money, ownership, trust, and human interaction are evolving underneath the apps we use every day.
And to guide us through this, we're drawing heavily from a really comprehensive source text today. It's titled, "The Future of Digital Value and Networked Ownership."
It's a fantastic text.
It really is. What it does brilliantly is dismantle the jargon. So, okay, let's unpack this, because our source makes it very clear that this isn't just a conversation about computer networks.
No, it's a fundamental reevaluation of how human beings agree on what holds value.
Right. But before we get to the future of value, we have to deal with a massive obstacle. We have to rescue the core concept from its own terrible branding.
The branding is so bad, the word crypto itself has become this overloaded liability.
Completely.
It's carrying so much semantic baggage that it actively impedes public understanding at this point.
I think about it like this. Imagine if we use the word internet to simultaneously describe the physical fiber optic cables under the Atlantic Ocean, the concept of email, and those spams, phishing scams trying to steal your bank login.
That's a great analogy.
Right. If we called all of that the internet in the exact same breath and someone said, "I don't trust the internet because I got a scam email," we would realize they were conflating the infrastructure with the malicious activity.
And that is exactly what has happened to this technology. For a lot of people, the word just means Bitcoin.
Or it means wild price volatility.
Or outright scams. And what's fascinating here is how that conflation prevents serious analysis.
Because it's all lumped together.
Right. When one single word acts as a shortcut for an entire family of diverse technologies, asset classes, and economic theories, the definition just collapses.
So how does our source text define it?
It defines the space much more precisely. It frames it as referring to systems where digital value is created, stored, transferred, or verified using cryptographic methods and network-based rules.
Okay, and let's keep that grounded. Because for an audience that already understands the basics of how the modern web works, we don't need to get bogged down in defining what a basic ledger is.
Right, we all know banks use ledgers.
Yeah, and we know Bitcoin introduced a decentralized ledger. But to understand why a decentralized ledger for value is even necessary, we have to look at the friction in our current system.
Because the original internet was a revolution in moving information.
Exactly. It made data frictionless.
It made data infinitely replicable. And that is the defining characteristic of the information age. But moving value is an entirely different architectural challenge.
Because you can't just copy and paste money.
Exactly. It's the classic double spend problem. You cannot treat money like an email. If you send a digital dollar, the network cannot allow you to keep a copy of that dollar.
Which makes sense. But the traditional internet protocol suite wasn't built for that, right?
No, it wasn't built to handle stateful, scarce assets natively.
So how do we patch that hole? We built this massive, complex layer of intermediaries.
So many intermediaries.
And I think this is where we need to look under the hood of our current financial system. Because as a user, when I open my banking app and pay for a coffee, it feels instant.
It feels incredibly digital and seamless.
Yeah, but that slick user interface is really just a skin stretched over a very analog, deeply fragmented back-end architecture.
The front-end experience is digital, sure, but the back-end settlement relies on a patchwork of isolated databases.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning when you initiate a digital payment, you are not actually sending an asset over the internet. You are sending a secure message.
Wait, really? A message?
Yeah, you're just messaging your bank, requesting them to alter their internal database to deduct funds from your account.
And then my bank has to message the merchant's bank.
Right. But it's rarely even that direct. It usually involves a payment gateway, a processor like Visa or MasterCard, a clearinghouse.
It's like a bucket brigade of institutional ledgers.
Exactly. Each institution has to update their own isolated database, reconcile it with the others, and eventually, maybe days later, the actual underlying funds are settled.
And every participant in that bucket brigade introduces friction.
They introduce latency, counterparty risk, and of course, fees.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because in highly developed markets, that friction is mostly hidden from us, right? It's subsidized by merchant fees.
It is, until you try to move value outside of that specific walled garden infrastructure.
Like sending a cross-border payment.
Exactly. Then the friction becomes glaringly obvious. The messaging system, like SWIFT, has to route through multiple correspondent banks.
And each one takes a cut.
Each takes a cut, and each requires days to clear the transaction.
Which brings us to the core architectural proposition of crypto. The bold idea isn't just digital money.
Right. We already have that.
We do. The bold idea is moving value natively across a network, the same way the internet moves information, without needing that institutional bucket brigade to verify and settle it.
And to do that, the network itself has to be capable of establishing trust.
Right.
It requires a massive shift in the architecture of trust. And this is where we move beyond the basic concept of a blockchain as just a distributed ledger.
Because the real breakthrough isn't just that everyone has a copy of the ledger.
No, the breakthrough is how a network of independent, potentially adversarial participants agrees on the state of that ledger without a central referee.
Let's dive into that mechanism, because this is where the skepticism usually hits for people.
Oh, for sure.
Because if there's no central bank manager and no, Visa cybersecurity team overseeing the transactions, how does the network prevent fraud?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, if we're talking about open source math and consensus mechanisms, I have to push back a little here. I can't read cryptographic hash functions.
Most people can't read code.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
aren't we just trading our trust in a regulated bank manager for trust in anonymous software developers?
That is a highly sophisticated critique, and it really cuts to the core of the transition. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are never eliminating trust entirely.
Okay, so what are we doing?
You're shifting its locus. In the legacy system, trust is institutional and opaque.
Right. You trust the bank's internal audits.
Their hiring practices, their regulatory compliance, none of which you can inspect in real time. But in a cryptographic system, trust is programmatic and transparent.
So I am trusting the protocol design.
Yes, but that design is open source. It's constantly being audited, attacked, and verified by thousands of independent nodes globally.
It's like imagine a group project where everyone has a copy of the master spreadsheet,
Okay.
and it updates simultaneously for everyone, making it literally impossible for one person to secretly change last week's numbers without everyone else seeing it and rejecting it.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. It's the difference between trusting a closed vault because the bank manager promises it's secure versus trusting a transparent vault because the laws of physics governing its locks are publicly visible.
And constantly tested.
Exactly. And those laws of physics are the consensus mechanisms, whether it's proof of work, which uses computational energy, or proof of stake, which uses economic collateral.
They force participants to expend resources to validate transactions.
Right. The cost of acting maliciously against the network is mathematically designed to be higher than the potential reward of cheating.
So it's economic game theory encoded into the software.
And that is what replaces the central clearinghouse.
So when we combine these elements, right, a native digital asset on a distributed ledger secured by game theory instead of an institution, we get something entirely new.
We aren't just creating a faster, swift network.
No, we are turning value into software. And when value becomes software, we unlock what the source text calls the superpower of this technology.
Programmable money.
Yes, programmable money, which sounds a bit abstract, so let's break it down.
It is arguably the most profound conceptual leap in this entire space.
Because historically, money has been inert, right? A physical dollar bill is just a piece of paper. It has no intelligence.
Even the digital dollars in your bank account are relatively static. They just sit in a database until a human or a very rigid piece of centralized banking software authorizes them to move.
So what does this all mean when we talk about programmability?
Programmable money introduces conditional logic directly into the asset itself. We are talking about smart contracts.
Right, and I want to make sure we explain the how here, not just the what. Because a smart contract isn't like a legal document you sign with a lawyer.
No, not at all. It's a piece of self-executing code that lives directly on the blockchain.
Okay.
It holds funds, it reads data, and it automatically executes actions when specific mathematical conditions are met.
So it allows you to embed instructions into the value itself.
Exactly. The money will only move if and exactly when the encoded conditions are satisfied, with zero human intervention required.
Let's look at how this actually functions in the wild.
Yeah.
The source text gives this amazing example of dynamic streaming royalties.
Oh, the music industry example is great.
It really highlights the friction. Right now, the architecture of music streaming is heavily centralized. A user pays a monthly subscription to a platform like Spotify or Apple Music.
And that money sits in the platform's corporate treasury.
Right. And over the months, the platform uses these proprietary, totally opaque algorithms to calculate fractions of pennies per stream.
Then they deduct their massive operational cut.
Exactly. And eventually, they send a delayed payment to a record label, who then eventually pays the artist.
It's a high-friction, low-transparency model. Now, reconstruct that exact economic interaction using programmable money and smart contracts.
Okay, so how does that look?
A user screams a song. The user's digital wallet interacts with the smart contract governing that specific song.
Okay.
And as the song plays, microscopic fractions of a digital stablecoin are streamed in real time.
And because the logic is baked into the contract, the payment doesn't go to a central corporate treasury to be divided up later.
No, the smart contract instantly routes the value according to the programmed split.
So like maybe 10% automatically routes to the platform's wallet for hosting the interface,
70% routes to the artist's wallet.
10% to the producer, 10% to the songwriter.
Simultaneously, instantly,
Yeah.
transparently.
The settlement is the transaction.
Exactly. There's no waiting period, no reconciliation process, no audits required, because the execution of the code is mathematically guaranteed by the network.
It completely collapses the distance between the creation of value and the realization of value.
It really does.
But let's pause and interrogate the reality of that for a second, because code isn't flawless.
Definitely not.
If my bank makes an error today, or if I get overcharged for my music subscription, I call customer service, and they initiate a chargeback. They manually reverse the ledger entry.
You have recourse.
Right. But if a smart contract has a bug or an exploit is found in the code, and those funds are routed incorrectly, there's no centralized authority to call. The network just executes the code exactly as written.
Yeah.
Doesn't that rigid immutability introduce just a terrifying level of consumer risk?
It introduces a severe paradigm shift in risk management, that's for sure. The immutability of a blockchain is its greatest strength, but as you point out, at the application layer, it can be a catastrophic vulnerability.
So how is the industry dealing with that?
Well, this is why the transition to programmable money is not happening overnight. The current ecosystem is actively grappling with this friction.
They're building native safety nets, right?
Exactly. We're seeing the development of decentralized insurance protocols, multi-signature wallets that require multiple parties to approve anomalous transactions.
Like requiring 2 keys to turn a missile launch kind of thing.
Basically. And upgradable smart contracts that introduce governance mechanisms to pause compromised code.
So the infrastructure is building its own safety mechanisms rather than relying on legacy consumer protection laws.
Yes.
That leads to another mechanical question about smart contracts. If the code lives on a closed blockchain, how does it know what is happening in the real world?
That is a very good question.
Say I have a smart contract for crop insurance. The contract holds the funds, and it's programmed to pay out to a farmer if there's a severe drought.
Okay.
How does the blockchain, which only understands its own internal data, know if it rained in Nebraska?
Right. That is called the Oracle problem, and it's one of the most critical infrastructural hurdles in the space.
Because the blockchain can't just Google the weather.
Exactly. A blockchain is, by design, a closed, deterministic environment. It cannot natively browse the internet. To bridge the gap between real-world events and on-chain logic, the network relies on decentralized oracles.
So an oracle is basically a specialized data feed.
Correct. But, crucially, it must be decentralized. If you use a single centralized weather API to trigger a $1 million insurance contract, you've reintroduced a single point of failure.
Oh, I see. Because if someone hacks that one weather API and changes the data...
the smart contract executes flawlessly based on fraudulent information.
Yikes. So how do decentralized oracles work?
They work by aggregating data from multiple independent sources, cryptographically verifying the consensus of that data, and then securely feeding it into the smart contract.
So it checks a dozen weather stations and averages them out securely.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for the broader economy? Because when you solve the oracle problem and you have secure smart contracts, you suddenly realize this tech isn't just about moving money.
Not at all.
If you can encode rules into a digital dollar, you can encode rules into any digital asset.
Any asset. You can represent a concert ticket, a piece of software, or a legal deed as a unique programmable asset on the network.
And that fundamentally collides with how we currently experience the digital world. It leads to this massive conflict over the concept of ownership.
This raises an important question regarding digital property rights, because the concept of digital ownership today is largely an illusion.
It really is. The source text accurately describes our current environment as the rented web.
The rented web.
Because the vast majority of our digital lives, our media libraries, social connections, digital purchases, they are entirely dependent on the centralized databases of massive tech platforms.
Let's look at the mechanics of that illusion.
Okay, let's say I buy a digital movie on a major retail platform. My assumption is that I own it, just like I owned a physical DVD back in the day.
But mechanically, what have you actually purchased?
Right, I've actually purchased a conditional license. It's just recorded as a simple database entry on that corporation's private server.
And what happens if that corporation loses the licensing rights from the film studio?
Or if the platform just decides my account violated some obscure terms of service.
They simply alter their database. Your access is revoked, and the asset vanishes.
And I have zero recourse, because I never actually possess the asset. I only possess permission to view it within their walled garden.
And if the digital economy is going to continue to expand, we have to ask, can it be built entirely on conditional access controlled by a handful of platform monopolies?
Right. And the infrastructural shift of networked ownership proposes a completely different model.
Instead of the asset existing as a permissioned entry in a corporate database, the asset exists as a unique cryptographic token on a public blockchain.
And because the ledger is public and decentralized, no single corporation can unilaterally alter the record of my ownership.
Exactly. You hold the private keys to that token. The shift is from platform-controlled access to cryptographic possession.
And the most important characteristic of cryptographic possession is portability.
Yes, portability is huge.
If you own a digital asset on a decentralized network, you're not locked into the interface where you bought it.
You can take that asset, plug it into an entirely different application, trade it on a decentralized marketplace, or use it as collateral in a decentralized finance protocol.
The ownership persists independent of any single application.
Now, I know the moment we start talking about unique digital tokens and ownership, the immediate mental association for many listeners is the speculative mania of NFTs.
Oh, totally.
Huh?
People paying astronomical sums for links to cartoon profile pictures.
Right, and our source text is very clear-eyed about this. We have to separate the profound infrastructural breakthrough of digital property rights from the absolute worst excesses of the hype cycle.
Because the speculative frenzy did massive damage to the public perception of the technology.
It did. But focusing on the artwork is mistaking the first primitive application for the underlying protocol.
Right, the breakthrough isn't the image.
No, the breakthrough is the mechanism of digital scarcity and verifiable peer-to-peer transfer without an intermediary.
Let's ground this in a non-speculative example. Think about digital credentials.
Okay.
Right now, if I earn a degree from a university or a technical certification, the verification of that achievement requires someone to contact the issuing institution's proprietary database.
Right, they have to call the registrar or use their specific portal.
And if that institution goes bankrupt or their servers get compromised, verifying my credential becomes incredibly difficult.
But if that credential is issued as a non-transferable token on a public blockchain?
Cryptographic proof of your qualification exists permanently on the network.
Exactly. You control it in your digital wallet.
And any employer can instantly, mathematically, verify its authenticity without ever needing to contact the university's registrar.
The implications for identity, professional licensing, and supply chain tracking are just massive. It fundamentally flips the architecture of the internet.
Because for the last 2 decades, the internet has asked, what can you access within these closed platforms?
But the programmable internet asks, what do you cryptographically control?
Right. But, you know, as intellectually satisfying as all this infrastructural theory is, I want to pivot to the practical reality here.
Let's do it.
If this transition is actually going to happen, how does it infiltrate the day-to-day lives of people who have a zero interest in managing private keys or understanding Oracle networks?
Well, the reality of infrastructural shifts is that they only succeed when the complexity becomes invisible to the end user.
Nobody wants to learn how the plumbing works to turn on the sink.
Exactly. The vast majority of people do not care about decentralization for the sake of ideology. They care about utility, cost, and speed.
So what of this entire movement is that the underlying plumbing of value is being replaced, and you will eventually use it simply because it's the most efficient option available.
Yes. And the source text highlights global remittances as the perfect wedge for this technology.
And if we look at the mechanics of the traditional remittance market, it is practically begging for disruption.
Oh, it's terrible.
Let's say a worker in the United States needs to send $500 to their family in the Philippines.
Okay.
Using the legacy financial system, that money has to be routed through the SWIFT network, bouncing between correspondent banks.
The sender pays an upfront flat fee. They suffer a terrible, opaque exchange rate margin.
And the recipient might have to wait 3 days and then travel to a physical location to claim the cash.
It is an incredibly regressive tax on the people who can least afford it.
The friction is geographical, institutional, and temporal.
Now compare that to the cryptographic rails. The worker converts their fiat currency into a digital stablecoin.
Which is a token programmed to hold a steady value pegged to the dollar.
Right, and they send that stablecoin directly to their family's digital wallet over a public blockchain.
The transaction settles in seconds.
The fee is a fraction of a cent.
And the value is instantly accessible on the recipient's mobile device. There are no correspondent banks taking a cut, and the borders are entirely irrelevant to the network.
And this completely shatters one of the most persistent myths surrounding this space.
The idea that this tech is only a plaything for Silicon Valley venture capitalists.
It is a vital point to make. The earliest, most aggressive adoption of this infrastructure isn't happening in highly banked, stable economies where the legacy system works relatively well.
No, it's happening in emerging markets.
Where the legacy financial infrastructure is actively hostile, hyperinflationary, or structurally exclusionary.
Right. People in Argentina, Turkey, or Nigeria aren't using stablecoins to speculate on internet trends.
They are using them to protect their purchasing power and bypass broken domestic banking systems.
And we are seeing similar borderless utility for online freelancers, too.
Absolutely.
If you're a graphic designer in South America working for a client in Europe, navigating cross-border payments through traditional banking can result in massive delays and lost percentages.
But a network-native asset flows to that freelancer exactly the way an email flows to them. The financial geography is flattened.
We can also look at how this impacts the creator economy, which circles back to the issue of the rented web we talked about.
Right. Currently, digital creators are essentially sharecroppers on massive social platforms.
That's a brutal way to put it, but it's true.
They build the audience, they create the content, but the platform controls the algorithm, the monetization structure, and the audience data.
If a platform decides to change its revenue sharing model from a 70-30 split to a 50-50 split, the creator has no leverage.
None, because the creator doesn't own the relationship with their audience, they just rent access to it.
But cryptographic architecture allows creators to build independent economic structures.
They can issue their own digital assets, memberships, access tokens, or direct revenue sharing contracts that they cryptographically control.
So if a platform changes its rules, the creator can just move to a new interface and take their entire tokenized community and economic structure with them.
Because the ledger exists independently of the platform.
It's really about reducing the power of intermediaries to extract value.
Whether the intermediary is a correspondent bank charging exorbitant remittance fees or a tech platform monopolizing creator revenue.
The programmable internet provides an open source alternative for routing value directly between the provider and the consumer.
Now, for a listener hearing all this, the sheer scale of the proposed change can trigger a lot of skepticism.
It's natural to think, look, legacy banks and tech monopolies are deeply entrenched. Society doesn't just abandon its financial habits overnight.
And while that is generally true, our source text provides a fascinating case study that proves societal financial behavior can actually evolve at staggering speed when the utility is undeniable.
Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the rapid digitization of payments in India serves as a perfect historical parallel here.
India's transition over the last decade is one of the most remarkable infrastructural leaps in modern financial history.
Let's map out that transition. Because not long ago, India was a heavily cash-dependent society.
Very heavily.
And cash has immense utility. It's physical, it settles instantly upon physical transfer, and the trust model is universally understood.
Digital banking, card networks, and point-of-sale machines were largely confined to affluent urban centers.
For hundreds of millions of people, a digital transaction felt abstract and structurally inaccessible.
But then we saw the rollout of the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI.
Right. It was a massive systemic push toward a new, interoperable digital public infrastructure.
It focused on mobile-first, scan-and-pay experiences that utilized QR codes, and the behavioral shift that followed was explosive.
I mean, you walk through an Indian city or even a rural village today, and it is ubiquitous.
Everyone from a software engineer at a tech hub to a street vendor selling produce is utilizing instant mobile digital payments.
The transition from physical cash to digital routing happened in a fraction of the time it took Western economies to adopt credit cards.
And this case study is crucial because it answers the fundamental question of user adoption.
Did hundreds of millions of citizens suddenly need to understand the back-end routing protocols of the UPI network?
Did the street vendor need to take a course on API integration? Absolutely not.
The complexity was completely abstracted away.
Precisely. People adopt new systems based on 4 pillars: utility, trust, convenience, and social familiarity.
Once the friction of the new system was lower than the friction of handling physical cash.
And once they saw their peers transacting safely?
The behavioral change was irreversible. The technology faded into the background, and the utility became the focus.
And this serves as a massive mental bridge for the cryptographic transition we are discussing today.
Because we constantly hear the myth that crypto is too technical for normal people.
Or that it's too late to learn because early adopters already made all the money.
But the India example proves that the end state of a successful financial technology isn't widespread technical literacy.
No, it's invisible utility.
You don't need to learn how to write a smart contract in Solidity to benefit from a decentralized insurance payout.
Just like you don't need to understand packet switching to make a FaceTime call.
It also demonstrates that our relationship with value is highly malleable.
What feels abstract, unfamiliar, or even risky today can become mundane, everyday behavior tomorrow, provided it solves a genuine structural problem.
But, as optimistic as that sounds, we cannot blindly embrace the utopian narrative here.
We really can't.
Because the path from experimental protocol to invisible, everyday infrastructure is paved with massive risks.
And this is where we need to actively navigate the minefield.
The source text demands that we confront the reality of this space, which means directly addressing the very real dangers that exist right alongside the innovation.
The volatility is the most immediate and glaring risk.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
While we've discussed stablecoins and infrastructure, the reality is that the vast majority of digital assets currently trading are subject to extreme speculative price swings.
If an individual interacts with these assets without understanding the mechanics, treating them as a get-rich-quick mechanism rather than an experimental technology,
The financial devastation can be absolute.
we also have to look at the structural realities of true ownership. We talked about the power of holding your own private cryptographic keys.
Being your own sovereign digital bank.
Right, but that power comes with unforgiving responsibility.
Very unforgiving.
In the traditional system, if you forget your bank password, you click a forgot password link. If your credit card is stolen, you freeze it, and the bank absorbed the fraud.
But in a truly decentralized, self-custodial system, there is no centralized customer service department to call.
If you lose your private keys, or if you inadvertently approve a malicious smart contract transaction that drains your wallet,
The cryptography executes flawlessly. The assets are gone, and they are mathematically unrecoverable.
the user interface for self-custody is still incredibly unforgiving, and it represents a massive barrier to safe mainstream adoption.
And we can't ignore the systemic risks of the code itself. We've established that smart contracts are self-executing software.
But software is written by humans, and humans make errors.
We have seen massive, multi-million-dollar exploits where hackers found a logical loophole in a smart contract's code and just drained the protocol.
And the immutability of the blockchain meant the hack couldn't simply be reversed by the central authority.
This is the dual-edged sword of the technology. The same feature that prevents a corrupt central bank from seizing your assets also prevents a benign authority from reversing a theft.
This ecosystem is currently speed-running the last 100 years of financial history, discovering in real time why certain regulations and safety nets were created in the first place.
Which brings us to the myth that this technology is going to replace the legacy financial system overnight.
That central banks will just close up shop and we'll all live in a decentralized anarchist utopia.
It's just structurally impossible. Legacy institutions have immense inertia, deep pools of capital, and they provide regulatory certainty that massive pools of institutional money require.
So what's the realistic outcome?
The far more likely outcome is a messy, prolonged integration.
Traditional financial institutions are not going to be replaced by decentralized protocols. They're going to adopt the cryptographic rails to make their own internal systems more efficient.
We will see centralized entities interacting with decentralized networks. We'll see governments issuing their own digital currencies on private ledgers, while public blockchains operate in parallel.
The future isn't a clean replacement. It's a complex, overlapping hybrid.
And navigating that hybrid future requires an active, informed stance. The parallel to the early internet is incredibly apt here.
How so?
The early web brought us democratized information, global connectivity, and entirely new digital economies. But it also brought us systemic vulnerabilities.
New forms of identity theft, data monopolies, and algorithmically driven polarization.
Exactly. The programmable internet brings that same chaotic mixture of profound breakthrough and unprecedented risk.
The objective isn't to dismiss the technology because of the risks, nor is it to blindly trust every new protocol that promises decentralization.
The objective is informed, disciplined curiosity.
Right. When you encounter a new application of this technology, look past the token price and analyze the mechanics.
Ask the critical questions. Does this require decentralization, or is it just a slow database? Who controls the protocol?
How is consensus reached? And what specific friction is this actually removing from the system?
That disciplined curiosity is what separates the participants from the speculators.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, pulling back the curtain on the mechanics of a massive architectural shift.
We've moved from the overloaded noise of crypto to the reality of network-native assets.
We've explored the mechanics of consensus, the superpower of smart contracts, and the collision between the rented web and true cryptographic ownership.
We are witnessing the internet transition from a medium of communication to a medium of verifiable value.
And understanding the mechanics of that transition is the only way to avoid being manipulated by either the extreme hype or the extreme fear.
To fully grasp the magnitude of where we are going, we ultimately have to look backward at where we came from.
Yes, to understand the future of programmable money, We have to understand the historical evolution of money itself.
From physical scarcity to paper representation to centralized digital ledgers.
And tracing that specific lineage will be the focus of our upcoming deep dives, providing the historical context that the daily headlines completely ignore.
It is the context required to actually see the foundation being built beneath the noise.
So as we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with one final structural thought to chew on. We spent this time dissecting how value, trust, and ownership are migrating from centralized institutional databases to decentralized mathematically governed networks.
We've seen how geography and borders become irrelevant when value routes like an email.
But if we extrapolate that forward, if the foundational architecture of the global economy is increasingly dictated by open source code and global consensus, rather than by the monetary policy of a specific nation state or a central bank, how does that fundamentally rewrite the balance of power in our society?
That is the ultimate question.
If your wealth, your digital property, and your professional identity exist on a network that operates entirely independent of the physical geography of where you sleep at night, what does it actually mean, practically and politically, to be a citizen of the digital world?
It is a profound shift to consider.
It's muddy waters ahead, but hopefully today we've given you the tools to start navigating them.